Hey everyone, it's Dr. Fletcher. Let's see, today let's talk about laboratory stewardship and cytology, and specifically EBUS. Now, I'm guessing if you're watching this video, you already know what an EBUS is, but in case you don't, EBUS stands for endobronchial ultrasound guided fine needle aspirations or biopsies, commonly known as EBUS. Before we get into this actual topic, why am I talking about cytology? I mean, laboratory stewardship, isn't that usually on the clinical side of laboratory, dealing with blood tests? And the answer is yeah, a lot of times that's what people think, but really, laboratory stewardship should involve anatomic pathology and also cytology as well. And also, I think it's really important to start laboratory stewardships in anatomic pathology and cytology because it's a way to get really good buy-in from your pathology group as well. Sometimes having them start to look at clinical laboratory stewardship might be a little bit out of their wheelhouse, but if we're talking about utilization and proper use of anatomic and cytology resources, sometimes it's easier for pathologists to get started there before they start tackling the clinical laboratory. Back when I first got started in laboratory stewardship, little secret, I'm not sure I've shared this before, but I'm actually a cytopathologist. And so one of my very first projects was actually laboratory stewardship and cytology. And cytology is a really good field for laboratory stewardship because for all you cytologists out there, you know who I'm talking to. We're really, really heavy into statistics and keeping track of diagnoses and cases. So it's a really good fit for cytology, which brings us to this endobronchial ultrasound guided FNAs. For those of you who have been part of these procedures, typically it involves a pulmonologist taking the patient into a operating room or procedure room. They're sedated, and then a scope is placed down the patient's trachea into the lungs. And this scope has an ultrasound probe, and so they can start to look around to look for, usually they're looking for a tumor, and then they can pass a needle through the scope to take a fine needle aspiration to take a sample of tumor. Typically, what happens then is they take the specimen and hand it to their cytopathologist or their cytologist, and we look right away at the bedside to see if they found tumor and to give them advice on do you need to take more samples, less samples. It's a wonderful technique that certainly can save some more invasive ways to get a biopsy. But from the cytology and the cytopathologist standpoint, we ended up standing around these procedure rooms sometimes for hours, and it was not necessarily the best use of our time. Then also depending on the skill or the experience of the operator, or sometimes the location and the size of the tumor, we end up standing there for a really long time where they keep sending us multiple specimens and we keep looking and keep looking and keep looking. And it can start to become somewhat of a frustrating exercise, especially for those of us who are standing around doing most of the waiting. So what I decided to do is one of my very first laboratory stewardship projects was to see if we could make sure that the stewardship of our resources, namely the cytologists and cytopathologists, were being used appropriately for these EBUS procedures. And specifically, I'll kind of cut to the chase. There were cases we would stand around for hours, reviewing six, seven, eight, nine passes, and it just seems so frustrating. And so I'll share a slide, and this is a real slide. It's not a particularly pretty one, but it's a real slide. And I took a screenshot of an Excel spreadsheet. And again, this is kind of going way back in the historical vault. But one of the first stewardship projects I did in cytology was I simply started looking at these EBUS procedures, and we started looking at on each of the needle passes that they did they get diagnostic material, i.e., did they find a tumor? And what we found out was the majority of the time, 60% of the time, if they're going to make a diagnosis of tumor, they would hit it on the very first pass. For the cases where they kept doing more and more passes because they kept missing it, what we found out was after the fifth pass, or specifically after the fourth pass, starting with the fifth pass, they never found the tumor. I'll kind of make it simple. Basically, if the person doing the procedure didn't find tumor within the first 4 passes. From there on out, starting on the fifth pass, they never found it. And so, why were they having us standing around for 5, 6, 7, 8 passes? From the laboratory stewardship perspective, what we ended up doing was providing this education to our medical staff, saying, you know what? You really shouldn't be doing more than 4 passes unless there's exceptional circumstances, because at least in our laboratory and in our hospital, in this facility, if you don't find it in 4 passes, you're not going to find it. The other thing it started kind of, suggesting was, do your 4 passes instead of having us review each one, put them straight into um, a fixative and let us make a cell block. I'm kind of getting into a little bit of weeds here in cytology, but for those of you who do EBUSs, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Bottom line, this is a great laboratory stewardship project involving cytology and these EBUS procedures, which tend to be kind of tedious and sometimes not the best use of cytology or cytopathologist resources. Um, Put together a project. Take a look at how many passes are being used, and this way you can give feedback to your clinical staff to help guide them to make these procedures quicker and safer for patients, and also to save on the laboratory resources. Let me know what you think. Are you having issues with EBUS in your facility? And I know a lot of us are. And again, I don't mean to take away from a procedure. It is a fantastic procedure when used appropriately, but they can be resource intensive. So let me know. Have you done similar projects? What is your current state of affairs with EBUS? Um, Any case, leave me a post, a comment, drop me an email. Love to hear your feedback on laboratory stewardship and cytology. And as always, good luck with all of your laboratory stewardship initiatives.